This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Doing well. Here we are, getting close to Halloween. And I know a lot of people have asked me because I've mentioned it before. I am going to do a live stream for Halloween. But in case, even though it's on a Monday, all right, which hopefully everybody's done their partying the weekend before, don't worry because, even though I do the live stream, I am going to have the show available for anybody that wants to watch it afterwards. People have asked me, so what are you planning to do this one on? Because everybody really liked when I did the one for Mardi Gras back in February, as far as all the weird stuff around Mardi Gras, the crimes and the murders in New Orleans. So I decided to, I'm gonna see what I come up with. Not only possibly crimes or murders committed, during Halloween, but maybe a possible tie into the occult, where there's dark practices. Or anyway, something maybe along the lines of why were these murders committed at this time of year? All right, let's see what we come up with because, uh, if you go by what, is reported in some sources, there is sometimes an uptick in certain type of murders that sometimes law enforcement, I think, is recently realizing when they go to a crime scene that there might be some type of indication if there was some type of occult. Hey, Slim, be careful. No, that's one of my dogs. An occult motivation for the crime, especially if it's a stranger on stranger crime, that kind of deal. But speaking about crimes and murders, it ties right into who the guest is for tonight. This gentleman's been here before. It was a few years ago, and his name is Robbie Thomas, and he's a psychic. He's been married for 27 years to his lovely wife, Ligia. Together, they have three beautiful daughters, and he focuses his entire core beliefs around his family and faith in God. The strength comes from the tight unit of family he has who supports him totally in everything he does with the paranormal and spiritual fields. Robbie's incorporated the family structure in the business of creating television, movies, and his writing, which gives a real strong foundation for his family working together. They, as a family, are very active in community, social, and charity events, and this also stems outward to other communities as well. Work hard, play fair, and love life while doing everything you possibly can to make a difference for the better is a motto Robbie lives by. By the way, it's a very good motto. Help me welcome him. How are you doing tonight, Robbie?
I'm fine, Marlene. Thank you for having me.
On the contrary, it's my pleasure. Robbie, I know I probably asked you this a few years ago, but for my audience, how did you discover that you were psychic?
Oh, this goes way back. I'll take you right to the beginning, age
Sure.
2. Yeah. I used to run around the house, and it ties in perfectly for the reconciliation that's been going on in Canada as at present. I'm Indigenous,
Okay.
Métis Algonquin blood. So, age 2, I used to run around the house saying to my mother, either I'm adopted or I know there's somebody out there. And she would get a little perturbed by it. My father would be, leave your mother alone, get in here. Fast forward to 1994 now. Um, we're talking 1968, 69, right up to 1994 now. I'll take you. The night before my mother passed, I had, and a lot of people have experienced sleep paralysis, where you can't move, but you're visualizing everything that's playing out before you. And I had the four horsemen in my bedroom, and they were going
Wow.
around, and the white horseman stopped and said, "Not to worry, everything's going to be fine in your life from here on out. But this is what's going to happen
And were
today."
you and this was basically you were conscious, you just couldn't move. This is how you're witnessing this, right?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
not only being stunned and knowing that the premise of who I was, being able to see and feel and what have you, and I'm 28 years of age now, 1994ish roughly. Um, yeah, so they played out what everything was going to happen that day, and the next morning, I'm a little confused, bewildered, hurt, and like every morning, I'd go over to my mother's for coffee and toast
Mhm.
before going to work. On this occasion, walking into the kitchen, she would usually greet me, and she never did. She had her back to me. I found that even odd. So I sat down and I started explaining to her, "I'm really compelled. I have to tell you what happened last night. And these are the steps that happened throughout the whole course of the night." And then I explained and I went through and I said, "They told me it's your day. Today's your day." She turned around, asked me to leave. Now I know many people can understand that push-pull factor where you want to stay, but you have to go because you've been asked to leave. You know that something's going to happen. It's sunken inside you already. So off I go. I'm back home now, sitting with my wife, and my best friend came over to go to work. About an hour roughly, and the phone rings. It's my father in the line, and he's screaming, "It's your mother, it's your mother." So we race back over, and I remember them pulling her out of the house, one e- EMT on top doing chest compressions, one pulling the gurney. I remember her little purple socks, her hand hanging over the side. And as they get her into the ambulance, we race off to the emergency. I stopped at the front entrance of the emergency, the doors, the threshold. And as they were bringing her in, the one fellow was pulling, stopped right in front of me. And I heard her. The man pointing the compressions to her chest heard her. And he turned to me and goes, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "Yes, did you?" And then he didn't have time to reply because the other guy pulled her through into the ER. Now we're into the room and they announced my mother had passed. So I sat for about, oh, 2 weeks in the backyard, became a recluse, raised my fists to God, why you ripped my heart out, the whole 9 yards that everybody else goes through. In the meantime, after the funeral, my mother's brother and sister, my aunt and uncle, pulled me aside and they said, "All those years that you kept asking your mother that you were
Oh
adopted,
my gosh.
you weren't adopted. We did find her. Your mother had another baby before you in the 50s, and her name's Mary." So, oh my gosh. So, the wheels were spinning. I was right since age 2. I knew all along, that vibe that was going on
Uh-huh.
inside me. Um, then I come to realize and find out the reason why. Was being indigenous in the 50s. There was 289 schools in Canada, residential schools, and there's
Okay.
20 in the United States, a total of 480 some schools throughout North America, where they would take indigenous people or children from the adults or the parents and place them in these schools. And they called it to kill the Indian and the child, to make them, and I'm not using this to be prejudiced, the terms of back then, right? To make them
Right.
white.
Right, right, exactly.
Exactly, right? So tradition's gone. Um, ethnic gone.
Mhm.
Everything is changing, right? Um, they adopted my sister out. They ripped her from my mom's arms in the 50s and
Okay.
adopted her out to a white family. Now, my mom gave birth to her when they did this at St. Anne's in Albany,
Okay.
Ontario, one of the worst residential schools. I mean, they built a miniature electric chair to
Oh my
mimic
god.
electric chairs, and that's how they tortured the children and killed them.
Oh,
There's a lot of
jeez. God.
children. Yeah. So you're reliving part of my life, and I'm just making awareness of what
Mm, sure.
really happened, right? So that's what I grew up knowing all this through my whole life now, and of course, teenage years, peer pressure. My first book, as we discussed before, I wrote that book in 2003, two, somewhere around there, 20 years ago. And in that book, I wrote where my peer section would crush me because how could you come out in the 80s, in the early 80s and late 70s and say, I have this gift, I can see, hear, and what have you. So I wrote all that in that book, in my first book, and now I'm up to 10 books I have out.
Okay.
Um, and I'm
But let
sure
me
we'll
ask
get
you something.
something.
So what did
So
your
what did
mom
your mom
do?
do?
Give you up for adoption to this family so that you wouldn't be taken away somewhere and be sent to a
No, then
school?
my sister. No, no. I was raised with my mother and my
Okay.
new father. She met a man in the
Okay.
50s who promised her the world
Okay.
and said he was going to marry her, but he didn't. So my mom was a young teenage, 15 years of age. And back
Oh,
then in the 50s,
yeah.
women got pregnant and got married at those
Yeah.
ages, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the marriage never happened.
Okay.
So now the Catholic Church looked upon that as there's a child who's pregnant and we're going to take that child into our custody
Mhm.
and we're going to take the child away from her when she gives birth. And that's what happened. Now, fast forward to the 60s, she met my father, married him, then had me. And then so you have this little snot nosed kid running around going,
Now I understand. I misunderstood. Okay, so
oh, okay.
yeah, because of course it was a few years difference. Now she was older and it was a different situation and okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but they no one she must have been wigging out trying to figure out when you were this little kid telling her that. She must have been thinking, "How does he know that?"
Yeah. Yeah. My mom, she was very spiritual. Um, I just, I can't say enough. Like anybody's mom, you love them,
Sure.
right? And yeah, so she was very well intuitive as well. But I mean, just looking at that and the aspect of what you just said is, yeah, I must have really bothered her. I mean, somewhere along the lines, they should have got this kid's getting on my nerves. Yeah,
Well, because think about it for her, how does he know that? You're
right.
like, there's no way he can know that, but somehow he knows that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Crazy.
what was it that she told you when she told you that morning that she passed away? Which it sounds like you were like a little bit surprised when she told you, "I want you to leave."
Yeah, that
Did
was the
you?
worst.
Because I imagine you must have thought, "Why would she do that?" When you
Yeah,
had already had that.
yeah. I was. It was a.
You know why I bring that up, Robbie? Because sometimes people, especially when they either go to a psychic or they're psychic themselves,
Yeah,
and they either have that intuition or that presentiment or that vision. And I think sometimes people don't realize there's certain things that just cannot be changed.
the
Just
inevitable.
right. Just because you can foresee it doesn't mean you're foreseeing it in order to change it.
No,
It's just
no.
there's no way to change it.
That's it. That's
That's
it.
it.
Yeah, I
You
mean, the emptiness I felt. There's no other cold explanation to say than um, my soul was ripped out of me, knowing that this was going to play out today,
right.
and there's nothing I can do about it. I
Hmm.
don't want to believe it, and of course, the human factor takes over, and I'm not going to believe, it, but it happened. It came to fulfillment. Um, I learned big lessons out of that, and we're on a path. Either you, me, or whoever, on the path we walk, there's many lessons in this life. To be humble, to be a beautiful person, to be truthful, to be the upstanding individual you can for your day that you live. Um, that was her moment, and
Sure.
she moved on to the spirit world, and as we all know, we're just not gone. We're gone. We go on to much more better place.
Sure.
Um, Yeah, I mean, now I'm with you and I can giggle about it
Sure.
but it was harsh. I mean, when you look at it, reconciliation in Canada is September 30th. She
Mhm.
left September 17th.
Okay.
So every September 17th, I'm knowing that the hardest day of my life is the 30th because I begrudge all what they did to her and my family in those
Okay.
schools, right?
Mhm.
Um, you can imagine they tortured them, they starved them,
Let me
you know.
ask you, is this and I don't know if you can tell me. I read maybe a couple of months that there was I wanna say it was this type of type of school where they had found some mass graves at.
Yeah,
Is that the
yeah.
same school or was it in the same area? But they were
Um,
talking along the same lines that all these children have been taken there,
oh,
and
there's
now
various schools throughout
okay,
Canada. Yeah, from British Columbia right out all right across Canada,
okay,
way up north. Yeah, and there's some in the United States as well.
okay.
Yeah, so the funny thing about it is, I have a good friend of mine.
Mhm.
Her mom was one of the 13 that were picked from across Canada to go talk to the Pope in Italy
Okay.
because he wanted to apologize. She went and she posed one question, and I got to know the question before she even got on the plane. No one else knew. And she says, "My mom's going to ask him, she's going to ask him, when are you going to give back all the artifacts you stole?" And I sat there and I go, "Oh my gosh, you're going to talk to the Pope like that?" She goes, "My mom, you don't understand. She's like in her 80s, and she
It's
and
like she
she
doesn't care.
you don't care because you put her through so much for years, right?
Yeah,
And she's a survivor, and I'm a survivor from that because I'm a second survivor through my
right.
mom, right? So I said to Deanna, I said, "Yeah, well, she's brave. She's a brave warrior, and I'm glad she's going to do that." She asked the question. He said, "They were gifts. Nothing is a gift, you know, and when you take it, and there's so much that's been taken. So,
Let
but
me
you know
ask you
what?
something, were these schools run by the Catholic Church or by the government? Or was it a combination thing?
Oh, it's a combination of the Catholic Church, the United
Uh-huh.
Church, the Lutheran Church,
Oh,
the
that sounds
Presbyterian Church, the Anglican Church, the Church of England,
mhm,
and the government. See, what happened was back in the day, the church made a doctrine, the
okay,
doctrine of discovery. That's what it's called, doctrine of discovery.
okay,
That gave the ability or the lawfulness of
okay.
colonialists when they come over to enslave indigenous people, take their land, and kill them. The three main things they wrote in that doctrine. The government adopted that and made it law. So then that's why you had the residential schools for so long
But
and
y
forever.
but I
Um,
don't understand, you could say the government could have made those rules, but you would think that these Christian religions, like you said, whether they were Lutheran, Catholic, whatever, they would have said, "That's against our religious principles. We cannot do that." I don't
yeah, but
understand. That's the part I don't get.
no, I know. And if we go further, see, Champlain. I'm the great grandson descendant of Chief Roque Manitobwich, who was in Quebec, who's the Huron Nation Algonquin tribe. Now, a lot of people have seen the Last of the Mohicans movie, where,
Yes.
right? Okay, so you see the Huron Nation tribe that's in there. That was my great grandfather's tribe. His daughter, Marie Olivier Silvestri, married the very first European documented by the government and church in 1644. There's a huge
Okay.
park in Quebec donated and celebrated for my family. The names are all there. As you can see, I'm Métis,
Okay.
that's the symbol, right? I'm Métis Nation. Um, Champlain came over. Cartier and Champlain, 1590. So we're talking the beginning, right? Right in the beginning.
Okay.
The Pilgrims landed in Massachusetts. And when they landed there, my grandmother, Unu Uchikapanuku, is married to Roque Manitobowich, who had a daughter named Marie Silvestri, right?
Okay.
So Unu was in Maine, Abenaki tribe. I'm
Alright.
Abenaki, Ojibwe, Huron Nation, Métis. That's my bloodline.
Okay.
So a direct descendant. So when the Pilgrims first landed in Massachusetts and they had that so-called turkey dinner, they never really had turkey dinner. Many more pilgrims came in on other boats that you don't learn
Okay.
this in school. They tied up the tribes in small pools of people, murdered who they could, burned their villages. They sat down, had dinner, and they called it the Thanksgiving. That's the true Thanksgiving. Then they took whoever they could and shipped back to England as slaves. I'm sure people have known this. And then they took the rest of them and enslaved them all, or killed who they could. They went from
Right.
tribe to tribe and village to village all the way through. My great grandmother descendant, her family, Abenaki, escaped from
Okay.
Maine all the way into Quebec, Canada. And
Right.
that's where she was born and Roque was born. And then they met in 1590, roughly, and or about 1600, sorry. And then they got married. And they had a child named Marie Olivier Silvestri, who married Martin Prevost, French from Paris, and started the Métis Nation. Um, so there's a lot of history in my family.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
The
So when I talk,
absolutely, I can imagine.
yeah,
That is incredible that you know all of that. A lot of
mm,
people can't ever some people do, but, you know, the best some people get is the pie chart, like, "Where am I from?" But not direct names, you know?
yeah.
Um
Oh, I got records that go back to their jobs, what they did, fur
Mhm.
trading. It was all documented back then in Canada. If a man married into indigenous people, they documented everything, like your
Right,
job, your children. And I got my chronological list of names. I'm 13th generation. I'm 12 back from Marie. I'm 8 back from having full blood, which is I'm still indigenous. Um,
right,
and then everybody in my tree line were indigenous marrying indigenous. So there wasn't like there's a huge break and there was just a bunch of white people and then I came out,
right,
you know what I
right.
mean? Yeah, it was all indigenous. So yeah, I thoroughly got it all done by the government of Quebec. Um, a genealogist ran all the charts and everything, and I'm glad I got all
Okay.
that record for my children. So now when my
Of
children,
course,
right? Yeah,
that's what you hope for, that
yeah.
you especially with that interesting history. And let me a le now that you're talking families, did psychic abilities run in the family?
Yes. In my one book, I always got to start this way because everything you talk about or anybody, I always start off and there's a story in the book, right? Signs from Heaven. We bought this home from a lovely lady named Gina. Now, Gina lived here one complete year, and her mom and dad helped her renovate the house.
Okay.
My wife and I were in the house hunt and gave it up. So we just driving one day around this beautiful night neighborhood, and there's a sign on the front lawn, and she goes, "Oh, I love that house." I said, "I'm going to inquire. You know what? Let's even just inquire about it." So we did, and Gina, we put in a really silly bid, lowered the price, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, they accepted it within an hour. Leash, we got the house. And then not only did that, they threw in brand new washer, dryer, fridge, and stove, like everything, right? And then the realtor called back and go, you ain't gonna believe this, but she's lowering the price. And I said, how can you lower the price when we agreed to the price, right? But it happened. And then the realtor goes, because you got me, I'm giving you 1% back on on my commission. And it was like, we're in heaven here. So we got this
Uh-huh.
beautiful home, right? And as I'm signing the papers with my wife, the realtor goes, "Oh, and the reason she wants out is her mom and dad were hit head on in a car accident and killed, but they helped her renovate the home." And oh my gosh, my heart fell because now I'm thinking I'm taking advantage of this poor girl, and I started
Right.
feeling really bad. And the realtor said, "Nope, nope, nope. Gina wants you to have the house." We got the house. Great. Now we're in the house. We're My bedroom is where her mom and dad used to stay in that bedroom. My
Okay.
one daughter stayed in a small bedroom upstairs. There's 3 upstairs and there was 2 downstairs. She liked the one up there, so we let her have that bedroom. Every night she's screaming and they're swearing at me. The man won't leave me alone. And so I said, oh, okay. And I could feel this pull in her room. I'm going, oh my gosh, this is not good. I set up a camera and all you see is streams of light, like in Poltergeist, right? Just shooting across the hall into her room like it's a porthole void area. So we move her out, put her into another bedroom. Problem's all gone. I called Gina up and I said, Gina, we have a little problem. And something else has happened in the meantime. My wife has seen this little girl running around the house, and I've seen her once or twice. My kids have seen her regularly, but she comes down to my wife before we go to bed at night and says, Teach me how to play. And Leisha would pull the covers over her head. And she goes,
Mhm.
He's here again. And so the girl would leave, right? And so Gina, she goes, Oh my gosh. She goes, What room are you in? I said, The one at the bottom and the front. She goes, That's where my mom and dad used to stay. And I told her the problem that I just told you about my daughter's having in that little room. She goes, and Michael, my son, would stay in that room. So the doctor would put him on Ritalin because he thought he was hallucinating and seeing things.
Oh,
I said he wasn't, because my daughter is going through the same thing in this house. And she goes, oh my gosh. And I said, but Gina, there's a little girl running around and she keeps coming to my wife saying, teach me how to play. And she goes, oh my gosh. She took a big gasp. She goes, no, my mom would go up to Michael's room each night and say the Catholic prayer, teach me how to pray. So the little
oh,
girl was coming down to my wife wanting to say, teach me how to pray. The
right.
prayer. So we
Uh-huh.
figured it all out. And yeah, so everybody here is seeing, crazy, crazy happenings.
So do you think that maybe she lowered that price? Part of it was heartbreak, but another part of it was like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah,
Probably. Yeah, come on.
yeah. Because I mean,
Yeah.
she loved this house, and you know what? The funny thing was too, and I'd catch her. I'd go outside, and Gina, for oh my gosh, maybe I'm gonna guess here, 3 years, maybe
Mhm.
longer. She would park her car across the road, and I'd go out, and there she was. She'd be staring at that. She loved this house.
Yeah.
This was, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
she one time she followed me on social media, and she said, "If you ever sell the house, please let me know." She wanted the house back.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
But yeah,
Um,
usually I've found that when you get stuff like that, and I'm gonna tell you a real short story. This was many years ago, kind of the similar scenario where me and my husband, we were looking for a place to buy, but we wanted something bigger and, one of those things. And we drove out like towards, where they have the bigger properties and they had just some brand new developments. And we were like, oh, there's a house for sale. It couldn't have been built maybe a year. It was really charming style. And, we called up the realtor and surprisingly, the person was asking like maybe a couple of $1,000s over what, if you walked into the models, you would buy it. We did something similar. It was a little bit smaller than what we wanted, so we said, "You know what? We're gonna offer $3,000, no, $5,000 under what she's." In other words, we thought she's gonna take a loss on this. There's no way. Same
right.
thing. The realtor calls us back like the next day. No, as a matter of fact, I remember when we told the realtor our office, she goes, "Well, she's like acting like I don't think she's gonna go for that because that would, And we said, "Okay, well, but the realtors have to give any offers."
Yeah, yeah.
She calls us the next day. She goes, "She's accepting it." And we're like, "What?" And then truth came out was that apparently somebody had broken into the house while she was there.
Oh,
And she was so petrified that
right,
she didn't care if she took a loss on the property. She just and by the way, the area it was a nice area, but I think it's that because it was remote, since it was a brand new area on the edge of town.
right.
That's probably why they. And I'm not sure, but I think she lived alone. But my point is, it was just that fear that once you get that in your head,
Yeah, you're stuck.
your money doesn't matter, not that much
Yeah.
anyway.
Right, right. Yeah. It's funny with and that, like you, with me, it played with my emotions a lot because I really cared for Gina, and just the having knowing that she came by all the time,
Right.
parking her car, I was like, oh, but yeah, it was amazing.
But you know what? But it's just that's the way it is. And you're still living there, right?
You were still living here, and here's the thing. One day, my daughter goes, Dad, there's 7 women on the front lawn, and I'm going, I could be so lucky, right?
Yeah, it's like
I go, what are you talking about? She goes, there's 7 women on the front lawn. So I open the curtain, and then they're all there, and I go out and meet them, and they said, we were the original people who lived in this house in 1950. I said, oh my gosh. She goes, yeah, my dad built this house. We owned all this land. There was no houses here. we were the first house ever here. And I said, oh my gosh. So I let them in to see all the renovations that were being done by us now. They
Uh-huh.
loved it. And I said to them, you know what? We put a pool in the backyard. And as we dug down, we found big horse bones, but we found
Ooh,
something really peculiar. I said, do you ever bury your folk in the backyard? And they said, no, we never did. I said, okay, because we found a little girl's hand with a frilly dress part. And when I pulled it out of the ground, I couldn't make it. I was dusting it off, and it was her bones and her hands and a little part of the bone here with the frill on her wrist.
okay.
And so I put it back in the ground, and
You must have been like, "Oh."
I was freaking, yeah. And I was thinking, oh my gosh. So I asked him, said, no. I said, okay, fine. So I went to the next door neighbor, Rob, he has the same name. He was a jail turnkey. And I have police officers that live across the road and what have you. And I talked to George. He goes, don't report this because they're going to shut your backyard down. And I
Mhm.
said, I know. And then being indigenous, I know that First Nations will come and my backyard will be, occupied for a long. I won't be able to get my pool in. So I did ceremony myself, put the back in, and did what I did, and because I know what to do. Um, Fine, everything's great. So then they bring their another year that went by, and then they bring their brothers over. So now I got the same girls, the brothers, and they come over and we're talking about this. And they said, the one brother said, I think a long, long time ago, way before any of the houses and this was developed, there was a farmer that used to live way over there, but the indigenous people used to roam in here. And sure enough, we live by the border of Michigan, so I'm
Okay.
not far. I'm a like a stone toss away from the river. So I
Uh-huh.
mean, you had the Ojibwe all in here, and the Hurons, and everybody, right, all through here.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's amazing, just amazing. So yeah, we sit there and go, that's the little girl running around the house.
So do you think that she was buried because her family was the one that obviously wasn't that family that lived there, but
No,
the farmer that lived close by, or what do you think?
I'm more or less going along with the lines of indigenous people because
Okay.
um, when they dug up the Blue Water Bridge area,
Mhm.
my buddy's backyard, where it all started, he goes to me, oh, here's another part of the story. He goes, Rob, we're seeing apparitions in the house. Grandma's going, that's his mother-in-law lives upstairs. We call her Grandma.
Mhm.
Grandma's going crazy, and the doors are closing in the house. I go over,
Okay.
sure enough, there's stuff, right, happening. Well, we dug up his water lines, and he goes, I'm changing my water lines from the back to the front. There's more access for me. I have my kitchen over here. I said,
Okay.
okay. We started digging up body after body. So they
Oh.
closed down his um his yard. This is where I know you're going to close you down, right?
Right.
And they took the bones to Toronto forensics, and it
Okay.
made the news. 700 years older than Christ. It was
That's
headlines, and it was amazing. So everybody was buried 1 foot from each other, 2 feet down, straight in a line. And then there's other bodies still there, but we didn't dig them up. And First Nations came, ceremony. But his backyard was tied up for I think 7 months, and he couldn't do nothing.
sure.
Um, and it's honorable and
Right,
reasonable, right?
right.
Yeah. So then that spurred the big, huge dig along the riverfront where they were finding all the artifacts, and it was a community of indigenous people that lived there. So I know that coming back in
Yeah,
here,
usually waterways, there's
yep,
always settlements close to waterways,
settlement. Right.
because for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know what?
So
It's so funny because earlier today I was researching an article and it talks about this discovery that they did in the 1930s called Minnesota Woman.
right,
Okay, in Minnesota. All right, she was discovered. They same thing. They were doing digging a roadway, and they discovered her about 2 feet under. And this was in the 1930s. And when they pulled it out, they thought she was, they thought she was maybe like you said, maybe around the time 2000.
right,
Finally, fast forward when they did the radiocarbon a little bit, turns out she's like 8,000 years old. Okay,
right,
long because see they're realizing that because they were thinking the first indigenous tribes were around around that 2000 period around the birth of Christ, and she
right,
kind of disproved at least Michigan, and that they've somebody's been around for a long time.
Oh,
And
yeah.
the thought was she was a teenager. She was 15 or 16 years old, had never had children. That's how intact her skeleton was. Then they determined also that they think that because she had a layer of shells on her, that she either fell off a boat or through the ice, and then that's why the shells settled on top of her, because they found
Right.
a lot of shells on her. And she was buried by the Sioux Nation in on their land. So in other words, after they took she's not accessible any longer for study, but her discovery proved that what they had thought about as far as settlement
Right.
of natives, indigenous tribes, is way before
Oh,
what they
exactly.
thought.
There's a
Yeah.
place about a half an hour from where I live, and the Paleo people. Now, if you
Okay.
Google the Paleo people, they date back 15,000 years to
Okay.
20,000 years. So way before Christ. And the
Mhm.
settlements, and it's called Rock Glen. You can Google Rock Glen, Arcona, and you'll
Okay.
see everything there. I take my family there every year. We go and just to pay homage and see the beautiful waterfalls and all the artifacts and what have you. Yeah, so and I mean, we go back, oh my gosh, even further if you're really thinking going way up north, to the Inuit, the
Mhm.
Eskimos, right? Um, oh my gosh, even out west, the British Columbia, all through the states. I mean, yeah, I mean, people,
Right. It's in other words, so much for what they say is fact. That now a lot of these things the academics have had to like retract and give different timing to this. Now let me and I'm curious about this. Do you consider yourself a medium? Do the dead people come to you, or do you just do the psychic as far as maybe seeing what happened to them?
yeah. The like real quick, grab this behind me. So
Okay.
the title in the book, you see psychic
Mhm.
profiling.
Right.
Right. That is derived from law enforcement. Even
Okay.
like the real deal, whatever it says there, that's
Mhm.
the title from them.
Okay.
Um, if you go on my website, you take a look. I'm an indigenous seer.
Okay.
Um, People call it shaman.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just trying to get the different terms. Psychic. That term came along a long time ago with um, colonialists coming over and what have you. Um, I used to say a long time ago, I don't like, and I still do, I don't like that terms, right? So they say, well, how do you identify yourself? I said, my name's Rob. My mom gave me a name. My name's Rob. Um, but do I see? Yeah, hear, feel everything. Like when I go on a case, um, you know, being with law enforcement, right on death scenes, looking at autopsy, questioning
Okay.
suspects. If we get into a couple cases, I can give you real
Sure.
good
And the
details,
reason
right?
why I asked you is for a moment there, I was thinking, was this little girl that they're seeing, that your wife is seeing? I'm thinking, what if she's really coming there because of you, because something happened to her? That's why I was like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know,
No, I mean, Mac used to love going into Jessica's room to play with all her makeup, right? And Mac being the middle child, so sneaky too. So she'd sneak up into Jesse's room, and you go down the long hallway. You had to turn right, and go about 3 or 4 feet till you get to Jesse's door, and you open it, you go into Jesse's room. Well, all we heard was a big scream, and Mac come running down the stairs, falling the first floor, second floor, run into the living room and grab me. And she says, the girl was standing right there at the door. I
okay.
said, like she goes, they all seen them, right? So I think the little girl, even pre us,
Mhm.
when Gina was here, she was going through the same thing. And I looked at the family, and I mentioned that the girls that were out front, and they
Right.
came in, and we mentioned that to them. Certain girls, the older ones, they looked at each other like, and I know they know what I was talking about. They just
Yeah.
didn't want to admit it. Yeah. So it happened to them too, obviously.
Yeah. It's like, oh boy, he saw her.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So fast forward, how did you find yourself involved in a criminal investigation or of a murder?
I went through to be a police officer twice. Funny that, hired and fired in the same day.
Okay.
Yeah, 17-year-old, you know, kid knows everything. But I mean, I went through all the psychological, I went through all the physical, all the interviews. It was a week of all this with law enforcement in my hometown. They were taking 3 auxiliaries, so I finished in the top 3. I'm happier than a peacock. I don't care what anybody says because at age 17, always in my head was, "I'm a cop. I'm a cop." That's all that
Uh-huh.
mattered, right? And
Right.
I'm just happy to
Sure.
tell mom and dad. So I remember sitting in the chief of police office, and there's 2 auxiliaries to my left, and I'm by a chair by myself in front of the chief's desk. And this big burly guy comes in and sits down. He grabs the paper and he congratulates those 2 over there. He shakes their hands, and everybody's, you know, happy family. And didn't shake my hand. Come over and sat down, and he goes, "Son, how old are you?" And I said, "Chief, I'm 17. You know, yeah, yay for me." And they start giggling, and then he's laughing, and he goes, "You have to be 20 to be an auxiliary."
Oh boy.
And he goes, "I don't even know how you made it this far in the process." And he was having to laugh that I had a mustache. I mean, I was built when I was 17, right? So okay, my bubble got bursted. And then he said,
Uh-huh.
"Don't give up, you know, keep going." So then later on, I got hired on when I was 21 years of age, a little
Okay.
town outside of Toronto, Canada. Then I come home, and now I'm getting ready to move to Peel region. And I have to give away my house, like the rent we were renting, and give away my dog, and get ready to move right away to go down there. Sitting in the kitchen, the lady screaming in the backyard, "Accident, accident." So I run out the screen door, jump up on top of the fence, and I see her in her house coat, and she's pointing down the laneway of this row of townhomes, and she's saying, "Accident." So I hopped the fence, and I started running the driveway, and it curved out to the road, and I'm looking for traffic, and everything's normal, no accident. And the guy says, "Over here." He's on a screen in a townhouse, and so I go over to him. I go in the kitchen. There's a lady running around the table screaming. There's a guy to my right on a doorknob, and he goes, "Come here." So I go over to him, and now I'm still in my frame of mind. I took the CPR course, the first aid, all that stuff, right? First
Uh-huh.
responder mode. Here I am, number one first responder. And he opens the door, grabs my shoulder, shoves me, and shuts the door. And I'm looking for blood on the floor. And as I look up, there's a man in the bathroom, and he's looking right at me. He's got blue purple lips, and he's gone. All right, so I start to check for vitals. I'm checking for vitals. I'm looking at him, touching him, trying to find some pulse. I go do CPR, and I hear, "Let me go." So I stopped for a moment, and it didn't clue in that he's talking. "No, I'm a first responder. I'm going to save this guy. I'm Mighty Mouse." So,
Uh-huh.
and I do it again, and I hear, "Let me go," and I stopped, and oh, I get it now. And as I back up out that door, remember there was only 3 people. Now there's like
Right.
the whole neighborhood,
I was like,
and
who was this guy that just put you in there? That's like,
yeah, I know, right? And I'm looking, and all these eyes are peering at me. And my father finally made it around the block and comes to the screen. And the first words he said was, "Well, is everything okay?" And I just naturally went like this, and everybody screamed, right? So, yeah, coroner said to me, "Son, no matter how hard you would have tried, he had a torn coronary. His heart wall was gone, and you wouldn't have been able to save him." And so, oh wow, and I was busted up about that. Then it turned out to be, it was my sister's best friend's father. So then
okay.
I knew Sandy, that was her dad, and I was like, "Oh, I'm even busted up more." So I decided, you know what? I want to be a cop. I call up,
Oh, wait, wait, wait. Who said,
yeah,
let me go?
the man who was dead in the bathroom.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. I just wanted to clarify that. It'd be like, okay.
Yeah, yeah. We can giggle about this stuff now because it's years later.
I take it
Um,
you didn't say that to anybody outside, right?
no,
Like,
no,
no, no.
no. So I call up the precinct, and I said, "I'm no longer want to be a peace officer." And they said, "You can't, because we spent so much money on you, time, and you just can't do it. And they wanted to talk and talk, and we had meetings. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, the only way you're going to be able to leave and not be with this precinct is you're going to do a movie. And the movie contains other firefighters, EMTs, and police officers who quit under duress. And I said, well, I'm not stressed. They said, no, you're full of duress and you're going to go on film. I said, okay. So I remember the captain and the sergeant coming over and a film crew. And we're going through, a mirage of different questions. And then they hit that question, why I want to quit. And I said, well, I found him dead and he was talking to me. And their jaw,
Oh boy. It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
so it's like, don't worry, we're letting you go. That's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, you can go. Yeah, it was funny. So shortly after that, 1990, I'm I'm in the parking lot with a friend of mine who is the curator of an apartment complex. So I'm looking over his shoulder, and Greg has got his eyes on me, wondering why I'm not paying attention to him. And I see this guy walking 50 yards away across to go into the main entrance, and he had a black shroud around him. And whenever I see black around somebody that's that
Okay.
vivid, there's evil, there's something wrong. It's not good. They're not good. So
Okay.
Greg looks over his shoulder and goes, "Oh, that's Jesse. You want to go and meet him?" And so by then, Jesse's already up into his apartment. We go into the main entrance. Greg gets me into his apartment. Now, my line of questioning is so mono-focused as, here I am again, Peacock, police officer. And I'm saying to him, like, where do you work? You know what I mean? What are you doing? Yeah, just the line of questioning was really badgering him. And he says to me, he got to the point where he gets up and he's a sawed off miniature Eddie Van Halen to a T, 5 foot
Okay.
nothing, okay, to a T, long hair. And he stands up, he goes, you want to know how we killed him? And then I know how we got to that one point to that,
Uh-huh.
and him coming right out. And then Greg's perking up. His girlfriend comes out of the alcove dining area. She's pregnant and she's vividly really upset. And this guy turns around and knocks her one. And
Oh
she's
my
pregnant,
gosh.
right? Something, oh gosh, right? So now I'm sitting there and he goes, stand the F up. So I stood up and he goes, are you effing hot? And I'm not thinking, right? And he pulls up my shirt and he's checking my waistband and looking. He was looking for a wire, right?
Okay.
Pushes me down in the chair and he goes, this is how we did it. We were ripping off a car stereo across the way from the little cubicle gas station where Mark Campbell, the story's in the book. Mark Campbell, I think he was like 14 years of age, came from Quebec. His family did. He's making a little extra money to go to school, right? High school. And they couldn't get the car stereo, so they walked across the way to rob the cubicle of Mark. He said, we pulled the gun out, and the way he said it, he had a smirk on his face, and he goes, and we popped him like a rabbit, and he was jumping all over. And yeah, uncanny too, because this turns out to be my cousin's best friend, one of my cousin's best friends, right? And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's confessing the whole freaking murder, where they ran, what they did. And then Greg now is at the door and he's going out the hallway and he's going, come on, Rob, come on, Rob. So then he goes, get the F out. So I go to leave. He grabs me, pulls me down. He goes, if I tell anybody, he's going to kill me. And he goes, he's got an alibi anyways. And he pushed me out the door. So we're now down in Greg's apartment, right? And his wife is livid. Why you do that? Why'd you go there? Why? And so I go, I gotta go. So to the police station, talk to the detectives. They're wanting me to go back and befriend him,
Okay.
Jesse, aka Jesse, and get him to say the same spiel again.
Right.
And I said, you don't get it. he told me he'd kill me. He already made me. He checked me for a wire and everything. And they just kept on me and on me. So I gave them what I could. And sure enough, they were in court that following week. This whole trial was going on while I was there. And so, yeah, he got off on the technicality because of
Oh,
an alibi. Both of them did. Then Thomas Cook decided he wanted to murder again. And he saran wrapped his girlfriend, held her arms, and watched her that she couldn't breathe until she died. And then he gave himself up. And he's been in jail now, I think, 20 some years. Yeah. Yeah.
and but let me ask you, did the police already suspect him?
Those two people. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They did. They even asked me, how, see, here's the thing, too, for everybody out there who's watching this, please. Okay. I giggle about this now because I
Mhm.
was foolish. That was my first case. All right. Now, professionally, I do everything with law enforcement. Nothing other than law enforcement. Family contact me. I tell them to contact the law enforcement. They
Right.
contact me. A lot of them know who I am. So, yeah, that's how I do it. But back then, being naive and just doing what I
Right.
did, I could have got killed. So
Sure.
don't think you're invincible. Don't think that you're, the psychic person out there because you're going to get hurt. You know what I mean? Yeah, just don't do that.
What do you think that you saw that black shroud around him? What do you think, that he had an attachment, or this was just whatever? What it was, just he had a dark soul. What do you think that was from?
Exactly what you said last there, the latter part.
Okay.
Dark soul.
Right.
These people have no meaning for life.
Okay.
They don't. And a good example, again, I'm in Kentucky now, and a double homicide with Detective Andy DeLay. And Andy pulled me on his radio show. He has a racing car radio show. And
Okay.
I thought, I know nothing about cars or racing, you know what I mean, in that aspect. I don't know why Andy wants me on a show, but okay, I'm on a show, Andy. So Andy's going through the cars and he's talking mostly, and I'm agreeing. I'm thinking, why am I here? Then he goes, Rob, really quick, this murder happened, blah, 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 blah. Can you give me any details on it? And he sent me photos right away via text or on the computer. I'm going, holy crap, you stung me. You got me, on live radio. So I mentioned about 4 or 5 things that nailed it. The family were listening and law enforcement, and they said, we're flying you to Kentucky. They flew me down. I get down there now. Andy's on the case with me. And again, the dark shadow, soulless individual. There was 3 people that we were looking at in this case.
Mhm.
There was the weakest link, and the individual who orchestrated everything, right?
Okay.
Wanted it all. All he wanted to do, and he kept calling me Mr. FBI guy, and he wanted me to come up. He wanted me to meet with him so he could shoot me. Verbally talking to me like this on the phone. And so I said to Andy, Andy goes, we're in the boardroom, and he goes, what can you do? And I said, give me some Bristol board, give me markers. And I said, I'm gonna profile the weakest link, which was Bobby. I said, before the murder, during the murder, and after the murder, everything Bobby did. And he goes, good. So I did. So I took my time and did everything, laid it all out like a puzzle, right down. And he goes, makes a deal with Bobby that Bobby will come meet us at the end of his driveway. And we
Okay.
thought, oh, this is great. So we got the weakest link agreeing to everything, right? So we get Bobby, meet him at the end of the driveway, just me and Andy. Bobby said, nobody else but you two only. If in fact, it wasn't supposed to be Andy, it was supposed to be me,
Yeah.
right? Oh yeah. So we hemmed and hawed, did all this stuff. We get down there. Andy's got the Bristol board in the SUV. I'm sitting there with the mic like this underneath Bobby's chin, and bad cop, good cop. And he says, you don't
Okay.
say a thing. You just stand there. I said, okay. And he's asking all the questions, being hardcore. And I'm sitting there like this, and I'm watching this kid, right? And he's not giving anything. So Andy goes, F this and everything. He goes, Rob, ask him questions. And I thought, oh, here we go, put on the spot.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I said, the heart of me went right into that kid. And I said, I know you didn't do it. And then when I started talking like that, Andy goes, just a minute. Goes, opens the back door of the SUV, throws the Bristol board on the back of the SUV, and he goes, read that. That's what he thinks about you. And the kid stood there and his jaw just fell. And he was just like this, right? Looking at
Uh-huh.
everything. So I got the thing under his chin and he's not
Right.
speaking. And I said, again, I know you didn't do it, but you were there, and you didn't help, but you were involved in a double homicide. Makes you an accessory to murder. And the kid's just like, and he goes, okay, okay, okay. I'll tell you everything. I just don't want to go to jail for the rest of my life.
So that's what I was thinking. You guys were gonna try to trade like some type of immunity for him to turn and give
Yep,
the full details. Okay.
absolutely. So he started talking like a jailbird. The whole thing. Everything that was on the Bristol board was exactly what the kid spewed out of his mouth. What was happening? The main character, that wanted just to shoot us, he gave a deathbed confession because now the gig is up, and he went to a doctor to I don't know, for medication, whatever he had to get, but he confessed, and not only confessed to a physician, he confessed to a little girl that the police wanted to discriminate, saying, because there was a big cover up in this case too. We were going
Okay.
after the sheriff and everybody else as well, because
Okay.
yeah, it's really detailed. It's a huge
So
case.
let me ask you something. How fresh was this murder? Was it Had it been a few months and they were desperate, or what happened?
Oh, this was, my gosh, in the news. I'm trying to remember the news clips when they said, he's down here doing this case. It was on NBC and everything. I think, like you say, a few months, maybe.
Right. The reason why I'm asking is that you always see, they go and get a psychic like when they've run out of options, when
Yeah,
it's like this is not going anywhere.
right, right.
So that I
And
was wondering if that's what happened with you, that it was like might as
yeah,
well.
yeah, and it was pretty. I like the way they formulated it. I like the way they
Okay.
pulled it off and did it. Um, it was so revered in the way they did it, because the fact that they needed proof, genuine. And if I came
Yes.
up with those points that no one knew, and I was only given photographs live on radio, I was on the spot, right? So I did it for Andy. I've worked several cases with Andy now ever since. Um, in fact, I signed my new TV series with producers way before COVID. It was Dog the Bounty Hunter producers and Dog and Beth producers who didn't know each other, that they were both
Okay.
after me. And
Okay.
I signed a contract a week before COVID hit. COVID
Okay.
hit, and it nullified, because we were 2 years. 2 years, we were all sitting on our couches, right? So
Sure.
then they revisited this a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago.
Okay.
And I just signed on the dotted line, and my cast members are like Andy, um, Martha Decker from Texas, chief of police,
Yes.
tough as nails, um, Cliff Chris from Colorado.
So
Um,
what is the series going to be about? Are they going to revisit some of your cases, or what are you guys doing on there?
no, we're going after people. We're going
Okay.
after the murderers. Yeah,
Okay.
the
So
real
these are
hit.
open cases.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. We have the first and second season already slotted, what we want to
Uh-huh.
do. So now everything's being proposed and talked to with the networks through the production companies. So we're hoping that this will happen, and that's as much as I can speak to that, because
Sure.
NDA, right? You signed the
Right,
NDA.
right. Let me
Yeah.
ask you something. Are we talking cold cases, or are we talking
No,
something
these are active cases.
active cases? Okay.
Active cases. And
Okay.
don't get me wrong. I know there's families out there who are going to tune into this. Yeah, I help everybody, so it don't matter,
Sure.
cold case or whatever. You know what I mean? But here's the poor thing, the darn thing. Sorry, is the poor people don't realize that when we do cases and we get
Mhm.
on to some of them, we stick to those ones until they're done, and then we go to the next ones and the next ones. It's not like, okay, we're doing you next week. It could be a year down the line, maybe two.
Right.
Right, right. So timing thing, right?
Right.
But yeah, and then getting back to that one case real quick with Andy,
Sure.
the kid gave a deathbed and then he killed himself, right? So
Oh,
yeah, he knew it was up, so he committed suicide, and then we had Bobby and the corruption and what have you. But the whole details of all that, I'm going to keep plugging this, because this is what got me the TV series. I had two
okay.
major production companies. Is this book, right?
Okay.
Psychic Profile, the Real Deal True Crime Cases. There's over a dozen cases in here from 1990 right up until 2018, I believe,
Mhm.
internationally. So that
Right.
means Canada, America, everywhere. They're all solved. Inside there, you get the testimonials from the law enforcement.
Okay.
You get not. seen ever before documentation. It wasn't privy to the public that's
Mhm.
in there, text messages that are in there. Everything that starts a case to the end of the case is in each one there. And
Right.
not only that, you got the families, they write letters, photographs, the media, headlines are all in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to bring it out. I had to bring it out because people say, do police really use psychics? And do they,
I
yeah,
know.
they do. They're
They
all in
don't like
there.
to publicize it sometimes, but
Yeah, yeah,
because it's like, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Robbie, because, I'm sure you're aware that lately a lot of DNA has solved some cold cases,
right,
because and, sometimes the perpetrators are dead or they're in jail, and that's how, their sample has basically been entered into the database. But
right,
sometimes people don't realize that not all crime scenes leave DNA or viable DNA, in other words.
right,
Uh, you know, even fresh murders, sometimes because of maybe where the body ended up or the something, there is no good DNA that could be
right.
used. Sometimes I know they use it to identify even unidentified victims. Same thing. If this perpetrator just happens to be one of these people that has never been arrested, doesn't mean anything because they're not in any database.
You
So,
know, I was reading about the DNA factor of touch DNA.
mhm,
Um, then there's the DNA of the fact that you or I get into a situation where we get so angry, our DNA changes
right.
scientifically.
Mhm.
Then I started reading about the doppelgangers, people
Yes.
who look like other people who have certain qualities and DNA the same. So during a crime, your passion or whatever, and this person's angry and their DNA changes, comes this guy, and this guy gets put in jail. How many innocent people are in jail because of that figurative way of thinking or aspect of it's happening truly? There's a huge topic to talk about.
Oh, you know what? I could go down this rabbit hole because I've heard of, how everybody's saying, well, with DNA evidence now, you've got a more solid conviction. In reference to what you were saying about, innocent people being sent, convicted,
Right,
but and people are saying, well, if there's DNA evidence, then definitely this is the guilty party. And I'm not saying I'm pretty sure a good majority of them, especially if they're already in prison for other bad crimes, I'm sure that they're guilty.
sure.
But you always hear, what if in the future they're able to clone DNA, like enough DNA to plant some. If you really want to, like, let's go down that at a scene, and all of a sudden, in other words, where I'm going is that I was hearing that theory about the that DNA evidence eventually will not be as rock solid as we think it will. If in the future it's proved that your DNA can be duplicated somehow,
Right, right. I read
and
that as well.
yeah, and it's like, okay, in other words, it's almost the same as, I'm going to frame somebody, by leaving certain evidence. Well, in the future, which is not that far off, believe me, at the rate that science is going, where somebody could, leave some type of duplicate some type of DNA evidence and place that at a scene, and let's go down that. I mean, I think it's an important tool, but you know how that CSI effect that people think that somebody's going to show up a lab and they're going to get all the information, and voila, you've got a victim that's going to be identified and the murderer. Sometimes
Right.
it doesn't work that way, and I'm sure you've seen it in your work that sometimes despite best efforts and even evidence, the answers are not that easy to come
No,
by.
they're not. Um, you got to be 100% proof positive. Um, I mean, we're in cases where, oh my gosh, the smoking gun and
Right.
everything else, and you know, the storyline. I call
Sure.
it storyline. It's the criminal aspect of what they
Mhm.
did. I mean, it's all there, but wait a minute, it wasn't them. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like, you could think,
we
"Oh,
just
that
have
person has
to,
a motive,"
yeah,
but
yeah,
that doesn't mean they did it. I mean, yeah,
right,
motive is good, don't get me wrong, but then you think about, what about all these stranger on stranger murders? Because,
right,
you always look at somebody around that victim, like you said, that has a motive,
right,
but sometimes there's murders that are committed by strangers that There's no motivation of love, revenge, hate, the normal stuff
No.
people kill each other over. They
Right.
just might be a psychopath looking for an opportunity to claim a victim, and there you go. And it's
There
like,
you go.
yeah,
That brings yeah, that brings me to a case where, years ago, a lady was stabbed out of heat of passion. And we know when murderers do that to their victims out of passion, it's just not one or two, it's like 50 or because of the passion, right? Um, I had the gentleman call me up and he says to me, they're trying to pin it on me. My wife was murdered, but I was in England at the time.
okay,
And I said, yeah. And it's funny because I told Peter, that's the gentleman's name, that I just got asked to come on this case. I can't talk to you. And he goes, I need your help though. And I said, I can't talk to you about this. I can't further along with this. And I already gave a name to these guys, the law enforcement. And so lo and behold, that name is one of the guys who was suspect. And not
okay,
only did they question him once, but three times. And, um, then I come to learn over the years different information that's tied into this case
mhm,
where he was the lover of her and she was trying to tell him no, we're done, because she wanted to reconcile with Peter. And
yes,
so now you see the passion come in here, and they both worked at the same job.
okay.
And so yeah, um crazy, you know what I mean?
Let me ask you something. When you do the profiling, do you profile physically or do you profile by the personality? What or both? What the information that do you give the police?
Yeah, I get them everything, like our senses, smell,
Okay.
touch, taste, everything.
Okay.
Words that are spoken. I like it when when I tell them something and they go and tell the suspect and they go, "How did you freaking know?" There's a great example on my website. There
Mm,
is they were looking for a lost individual. Many cases on my website, right? But they're right
right.
on the front page. You scroll down, they're looking for a lost individual. And I said exactly what he was doing to the family. And sure enough, he wasn't murdered like everybody thought he was. And he
Okay.
goes, and his words were something like, "How the hell did he know I was exactly doing that?" And they're saying that. It's like
Okay.
it blows their mind, right? So you try to give law enforcement the most tangible that
Okay.
they can make something click, and then they know they're on the track or the trail of getting that individual, right?
How about victims? Do they ever come to you and say, "Is this person dead or not?" Somebody that they can't find.
Right. Um, yeah, there's cases in the book that I've had people come, and there's a clip on my website. Again, I refer to that because there's a lot of stuff I put out there for people to see.
Mhm.
It's 99.9 the Fox FM radio show. It was the program director.
Okay.
I had 2 days before this little girl went missing into the tree line, the pile of rocks and rubble that were there, the Mennonite wheels, the buggies that they drove, their clothing, the area. And I showed him 2 days
Okay.
before. And so he pulled me back on the show after this happened. And you hear his words. He goes, um, "You showed me the drawings and stuff before it happened, before they even started to investigate this part of the case." And he goes, "I
Mhm.
can't believe it that it all came true and what have you." Um, that was my way of making sure that it was out there, and because it was a big, high profile case. And
Okay.
so we go down there and I sat with the detectives, and I was there when the father did the lie detector test, and I got planted into the mother's house. I went under AKA John, a friend of the family, to get
Okay.
arraigned. And that type of stuff when they say, "Can you do this?" And I don't mind doing it, but I sweat a little bit too, Um,
Right.
yeah, but I mean, I was there and really peculiar situations and what have you. But the two that did it that I mentioned did get arrested, um,
Mhm.
which is great. And unfortunately, and there's good sides to it. There's always a bad side, but you still don't have
Right.
the little girl, right? Which is sad.
All right,
And
because even though I know they've convicted, but before you know, it's no crime. I mean, no body, no crime. If you don't have a body, Sometimes I know it's different when it's a child, but usually when it's an older, like an adult or a teenager,
Right.
it was like, "Hey, you haven't found the body." This person could have just decided, especially if they're an adult, which people don't realize there's nothing unlawful about you just, "Hey, I don't wanna be with my present life, and I'm gonna go away somewhere."
Yeah.
Let's even find evidence of foul play. Sometimes the police are like, "Well,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
this person just decided they wanna be somewhere else, being somebody else."
And yeah, I mean, while you're talking, my head's spinning with different cases. I get a call from, trying to remember the police station in Florida. The founder in Tampa Bay, missing, endangered elderly
Okay.
lady, right?
Alright.
Went missing. 9:30, I get the call, and they sent me a photo. And
Mhm.
so I'm looking at the photo. I got the case file. I'm going through what they have, and I'm telling them exactly where I see that she would be. And so as I'm talking to the detective, he's talking to guys, go here, go here. He's telling me here. And they were sending them to the river, sending them to where the rocks were with water. And I said, no, there's a bay and there's a bridge. And I
Okay.
said, we took a bus. And sure enough, it clicked to him because every clue I gave him, they raced and they got her in Tampa Bay, Florida, and they
Okay.
found her right there.
Okay.
She took the bus.
Mhm.
Everybody thought she was dead and missing, endangered. 12:30 that afternoon, the sheriff pulled a conference and said, "We found her, yada yada yada." And like in that short span, we got her and brought her home.
And that's the thing that and what do you let me ask you something. What do you see? Is it like a movie that plays out on your head? Is it something you see? Is it a feeling? How how do you, I guess, generate that idea or that knowing?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. Everything. Movie played out in your
Okay.
head. 4-year-old little boy goes missing in Kentucky. It was Canada Day. I think it was the day before Canada Day.
Okay.
Um, a photograph again. That's all I got. 4-year-old beautiful little angel on my screen, and I'm talking to my guides and spirits,
Okay.
and I'm getting everything like Papa John's Stadium, the front porch of the murderer's home. If you look, you stood on it where I described it, and I described the stadium, Papa John Stadium. Look through the clearing across the street. Papa John Stadium was right there. The
Okay.
flags, the construction in front of his home, repeat
Right.
offender, two other boys. Then I
Oh,
said, "Give me his name," and he did. The little boy did. He gave me his name because it turned to a point where I was talking to guides, and then there was a break. And
okay.
during that break, the little boy was being murdered, right? And so
Okay.
it was a long enough break that the boy got murdered. He held him down in his bathtub and drowned the little boy in his bathtub.
Okay.
So now I'm talking to the little boy, and the little
Okay.
boy gives me his name, Cecil. So I'm
Right.
drawing everything I can, right? And I put the name Cecil at the top of the page with an arrow down
Mhm.
to the 4-year-old's vivid mindset to me what the man looked like.
Okay.
I got all that. I faxed it to NBC, CBS in Kentucky, and the detectives and the liaison. Everybody needed it because they're looking for this little boy.
Okay.
Um, sure enough, the news breaks and they said the Kentucky police got their break. They arrested. They know who it is. Cecil knew, and he got arrested December 7th, 2007, and he'll never see the light of day ever again. And unfortunately, the other side of it is poor little Caesar is not with us anymore. But that's how it played out. It was being
Right.
shown everything, and like I was walking to that guy's house, seeing
Mhm.
everything vividly, and I'm writing as fast as I could.
So where he did abduct them from? From the stadium?
No, he was actually playing out front of his house with how the
Oh,
gas
please
lines and
don't
the
tell
water.
me this was a neighbor?
Yeah, close by. He actually lived
Right.
not too far. He pulled the little flags that the gas line and the water line people put in the ground so you don't cut
Mhm.
them. He was playing with those, and sure enough, he said, "Hey,
Right.
come here." Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I was saying sometimes these, crimes are committed by the opportunity presents itself for somebody
yeah.
like that. And,
Fortunately,
yes, yes. That is, yeah, you find that happens, and I imagine that sometimes it's gotta be the toughest cases to solve because if previous to that there's no connection,
Right.
how do you, like, connect, why well, in some cases let me ask you, what had you said that he had already, what, murdered other boys before that?
No, he was a repeat on the paper. And what's good about this too, I'm gonna say on my website, you can read all my drawings are there.
Okay.
On paper, he's a repeat offender of two young boys. Sexually abused those
I
boys.
was about to say, he was a sexual predator then,
Yeah. So I mean,
right?
how could they? Yeah, I don't.
Well, no, the thing is, and this is what people don't, and believe me, I have a problem with, the innocent being accused, but a lot of these predators, they start out by what you just said, not no, not killing their victim, peeping toms or following,
Right.
or then the molestation, and but they let them go. And then they get to the point where they finally act out on this fantasy because really that's their ultimate fantasy
Right.
is that and the fear of a witness. I'm leaving a witness behind that can point, me out, especially if I happen to live in the neighborhood of all things.
Yeah. Right. Um.
So yeah, and nowadays, unless it's a very, very young victim, yeah, they'll do that. And who knows if you wouldn't have given that feedback, he could have disposed of that body and nobody would have, like there's a million kids that disappear and
Right.
they're never found. So there's no way to where do we go with this? As far
Exactly.
as,
Yeah.
any type of clue, like who could it be. I know sometimes and let me ask you, have you ever been brought in on a case where they've only found maybe like skeletal remains? In other words,
Yeah. There's. Oh my gosh. For the show, we have a case
yes.
of that type. Um. I'm just trying to think how much I can tell you.
Okay.
Skull found in one pasture,
Mhm.
bones found in another.
Okay.
Um, very high profile.
All right.
Um, yeah, none of the cases are not high profile. You know what? Another thing too about the high profile thing, I think every case is high profile.
Well, no,
And,
no, and why
I
I'm
want the
saying
moms to
that
get
is that sometimes I know that bodies decompose like really quick,
right,
and especially let's say I live in Florida, especially here in the summer between the weather and the insects, forget it. In days. But, sometimes, you know how they say that if left X amount of time, animals
yeah,
basically they spread the bones out and, a lot of clues, even including DNA is dispersed or contaminated or so basically all you've got is bones. And sometimes
oh,
they can't even unless there's some type of nick on the bone or to the skull. Sometimes you can't even say how was this person killed.
right,
Have you
right.
ever had any something like that where they're like, "Hey, help us out because we've got just about 0 because all we got is a set of skeletal remains."
Yeah. Tommy Ventosi is a good friend of mine.
Okay.
He worked with the Doe Network for
Yes, I'm very familiar with
mega,
the donut
yeah,
work.
for long, long, long time. They found the remains of now here this is really this because we know who the girl was. It
Okay.
was his brother-in-law's daughter, Mount Rainier. She was murdered.
Okay.
Tommy says, "Do me a favor," and I said, "Sure, I will." And I made a promise to the dad because he was dying of cancer. I said, "We're going to get this solved. I promise you, we will." And he breaks your heart, right? It really does.
Mhm.
So, um, he ended up passing,
Okay.
but the detective in Boston or in Mount Rainier, um, Morissette, says to me, "You send me stuff, and if anything here, and I know what they do. It's like whenever I they drive me around. Is this it? They want to see if you're genuine, right, and what have you.
Mhm.
I'm going to get into a couple cases here that blow your mind." Um, so he said, "Send me." So I did. I did my thing, my drawing. who the individual was, bald, dark skinned fella who was involved in doing this. Send it to him. And he said to me, if anything, I'll call you back. If not, it goes under the G, garbage. And I said, okay. Not less than 3, 5 minutes go by, the phone rings. And it's him, and he's on the other line. And I remember him, I didn't even get a chance to say hello. He goes, did Tommy tell you anything? How did, he's going on and on and on and on and on. And I said, Tommy is a very respectable individual. Tommy would not tell me anything. He wants me to tell you. So he goes, I can't believe it. He goes, because this is the guy we've been looking for. And I got a guy like this in jail right now that fits this description on another crime. I said, okay. Couple years went by, and sure enough, about maybe 6 months ago, maybe 9 months ago, roughly in that area,
Okay.
Tommy texted me. He goes, "You did it! It was the guy in jail. They nailed him, and it made news. And
Great.
it was the guy."
And how long
Yeah.
ago had he committed that murder?
Oh, Tommy talked to me. Oh my gosh, maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little
Wow.
bit more. And the sad part was, I told the father,
Okay.
and I wanted him to see the ending of this, but I know he did.
Mhm.
I know he's seen it, right?
Okay.
But in spirit, I know he knows what was done, and I think he even helped push it along that way. But I wanted him to be alive here to see this done, but
Sure.
he passed on, and then we got the clarification.
And was it somebody that she knew, or was this just one of these
This
random
is one of these
things?
type random things.
God, that is so sad. That is so
Yeah,
sad.
it is. Yeah, I don't know what
Because
else.
you don't, again, it's I want to say these people, that, I mean, how can I say, obviously, besides ending that person's life, the ripple effect that it has on the family
Yeah,
goes beyond just, the one death. It's the effect is, well, I don't know, today, that back in, what was it, 2018, we had a big shooting here in Florida, in a place called Parkland, where a former student came in and shot
just seen that today on the TV.
18, was it 18 or 9? I can't remember. It was
17.
17. It was 17.
Yep.
And he got convicted, life in prison. All right.
Right.
Which is, and it's very sad. And I know that, they were considering the death penalty. And obviously this kid had a bunch of problems. It was very, very obvious. It was a tragedy, obviously, for those children he killed, and for himself, because this boy he was giving all the warning signs for a couple of years as a teenager. Beyond, teenagers can be troublesome, but he was giving out all these strong signals
Right.
that he was very, very troubled. Um, which is, I hate to say it, and I don't know. I'm going to ask you this: when you come across an individual who is mentally disturbed, does it is it difficult sometimes to read people like that?
Not really,
No,
because people who are not just mentally disturbed, but we'll say
hmm,
mentally challenged,
right,
um, have a figurative disability in, say, Asperger's or
right,
something like that. No, because they're very intelligent.
okay,
And if you can way past that, I don't want to say the wrong words because there's beautiful parents out there who are listening, right?
go
I'm
ahead.
just gonna I'm just gonna say this. If I can get
Yes,
past that screen of
yes,
that disability and see that person for who they are, it's very genuine and very unique. Everybody's unique. And it's almost like we talked about DNA. Everybody's unique. So I
right,
can get in and see that and see how that person is.
okay.
Um, yeah.
Just
Um,
because, and the reason why I'm saying is this kid, obviously, even though I know how can I say it? He knew, I think, I'm almost positive he knew the difference between right and wrong. In other words, you can
right.
be mentally ill and still be able to differentiate between one way and the other. And I don't know exactly what he might have been diagnosed with, or if he had a behavior disorder, but I'm saying he gave all the signs, like it was like, you see the train coming down the tracks. And sometimes, because then, you always compare it to that psychopath, like a Jeffrey Dahmer or one of these people
Right.
that's very cold and calculating. And yeah, he might you might say, okay, he could be diagnosed with a certain type of behavior, mental illness in the DSM, but it's a different way of figuring things out. And then there's people that you could genuinely say that they're schizophrenic and they're just crazy as and they do horrible things. They do horrible, you know.
Yeah. They live a life that's, well, let's face it, they're tormented.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
and you, how, I'm trying to be choosy of words because I know, again, the folks watching, right?
yeah,
Um, you get poked and prodded enough.
yes,
Um, everything plays on an individual like that. So then
sure,
their only reprieve or only way to
hmm,
find solace is to be that person. And
sure.
if they lash out and do something like that,
Yeah.
they don't know sometimes they don't know that
Well,
that's
sometimes I think it's that I don't know, and unless you're inside somebody's head, you really don't understand. What they say. Your perception is your reality. What
right.
the perception is, or what drives them, or when you hear some of them that will say, "I hear voices,"
Yes.
which is another question. Have you ever come across a case where the perpetrator, whether claimed that, and you could say this person had some type of attachment or was being influenced by a dark whatever into committing the crime?
And the voices told him in his head to do that.
You know, and I know there's a legitimate. I'm not saying that. Hey, all these people
Yeah.
that have a diagnosed with are no, that's a product of their diseased brain.
Oh, sure it is. Sure it is.
But then you might have others. I'm saying that what if what's happening mimics a mental illness, but in reality, what they've got is some type of dark influence that's directing them. Have you ever
Yeah.
come across that?
Well, the one case in Kentucky there where the individual was
Yeah.
wanting to shoot us, right?
Hmm.
Um, he grew a mustache like Hitler.
Really?
And yeah, he did. Like a little
Yeah, yeah,
mustache.
that little thing. Yeah.
And his hair was combed like that too.
That
Um,
is so weird.
yeah, so I remember, during the case and the talk with the detective things, the things that were brought up was the voices in his head, right? Um, that's where he went to the physician and gave a deathbed confession, and then later on
Mhm.
took a bunch of pills and killed himself.
Right.
Um, yeah, so there's a great example right there. And not only did he do the double homicide on these two gentlemen,
Right.
we were talking about other homicides that were done in that area that he was kind of tied to.
Right.
Yeah,
And people don't realize that once you're dead, you can't be convicted of a murder. People could say we believe this person, but if you've never been brought to trial because you're dead, guess what? They can never say he was the killer. They could say we believe he was, but once you're on the other side, if you didn't go, at least in the United States, if you didn't go through the trial process, they can't. How can I say they can't convict you posthumously
no,
of the murder? You
no.
know, and of course, that. Let me tell you something. Um, it's so interesting because how about have you ever been visited at home by a victim that wants you to help?
Yeah, little girl, Victoria Stafford, the one that we talked about going in the bush line.
Right.
Um, that one was huge. Um, even at the end, after we went to the balloon release with the family and the two got arrested, we
Mhm.
came home. My children were on the floor. I bring my family to other families to meet because I feel
Okay.
like to make people like wholesome to trust me, right?
Right.
So I
Okay.
bring my family and literally got adopted by them. So we're home now. My children are on the floor. My wife's on the couch. I'm sitting there, and then out of nowhere, she came and she hugged me. So I'm hugging her like this, and my family looking at me like, "What's Dad doing?" You know. And so then she handed me a flower, and
Okay.
the butterflies were all around her. So then I
Okay.
described that to the family the next day, and they said, the purple is her favorite color, and that was her favorite flower, and it was
Okay.
just, I said she came to thank me because now it's done.
Right.
Meaning she was the driving force. Yeah,
Yes. And I imagine for a child to, even if she's gone on to see her family or her parents distressed,
right.
because believe it or not, children are protective of their parents as well. It's not always the parent being protective of the child. The
Right.
child, even children are protective of their parents. Uh, as far as maybe she felt like, okay, I can go on now. My parents, considering everything, are
Yeah.
going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have found that's wow. And let me ask you, what happened with her? They abducted her? Uh,
The grainy video, when we were in the police station looking at it, we seen a woman leading her away from the school. So they
oh,
were looking for one person.
ah,
And,
okay,
and I talked to the I said, no, we're looking for two people. An
okay,
older an older fella than her because she wanted to prove her love to him by doing this. And sure
okay.
enough, that came out in court and what have you.
Mhm.
She picked her out and went to, I think it was like the Home Depot,
Okay,
and got hammer and stuff, right? And so as he got into the picture, he raped her in the back seat of the car, and then he hit her. And then the family goes, "Tell us how she died." And sometimes when I tell family, and I learned over the years, um, telling mums, it's hard to say straight up, but you can't bull crap a mom. You
yeah,
just
of
can't do
course,
that. You got to tell it straight as it is, right? Sugarcoating don't work here.
right.
So when you're asking me and I'm looking at them, it's hard for me to figuratively say it to you exactly, but I just went like that, right? And sure enough, he hit her with the hammer. Um, and that played out in court, and they're both in jail. And it's a sad. Whenever it involves children, it's very, very sad.
Sure.
Another, and going along the lines here, boy went missing in Wallaceburg, a little town outside of my city. First Nations boy, and so I get a call by the aunt, and her husband is law enforcement, but jurisdiction outside of that area, so he can't come in to do this. Could I
Okay,
please go down and take a look? So I go down, we're driving.
okay,
I bring my wife on every case I go. So we're driving, get into the town. I decided I'm going to pull over into this driveway of this business, park the car, text her I'm here now. Let's
mhm,
go to that house. So I pull the car up facing this way. And she goes, okay, here's the picture of the house. I'll be down there and we'll go there. I look at the picture. My wife looks and she goes, Robbie, look. And I looked up. The house was right in front of me. So
wow,
I went through that town and pulled up right in front of the house. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, spirit's working really good here, right?
mhm,
Um, I get out, I see a mail lady, and I said, I need to see water in a dock. And she says to me, you go down the end of the street here, you take a fast right and then a fast left, and the dock is right there. So we went down there, and I'm going, and Leisha is looking at me through the car, and I could see him in the water, like vividly see him in the water. And I turned to her and I go, he's in the water. So as soon as I did that, I texted the aunt back, and I'd say within about maybe half an hour or so, the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, they
okay,
bring their divers down. They put a heat-seeking camera, and it's on Google or YouTube. They put a heat-seeking camera into the air. But this
okay,
boy, this boy's been dead for a while, so I don't know
okay,
why the heat-seeking camera, it did no good.
right.
Divers went in. The water
And
was
I
a little
imagine the
murky.
water there is really cold also, right?
Yeah, at the time,
Okay,
Christmas time, it was really cold, right? But they
mhm,
went in, it's murky,
okay,
and I felt that they just missed him because they called it off.
okay,
Spring rolled around, the gases in his body bloated, and he popped up 1,000 feet from where I said he was, and the
okay,
slow drift in the water brought him there. But prior to this, and me going down there, Mom was on the phone.
okay,
And as I left Wallaceburg, every telephone pole for about a mile had a hawk on it. Every pole. And I said to my wife, I go, that's unusual because they maybe two, three, maybe four, but every pole for a mile, that's very
okay,
unusual. And that was him leading me at being indigenous, right? I can feel
okay,
the spirit. So I talked to another elder and I said, this is what occurred. She said that was his spirit. So I believe.
okay,
Um, his mom, I get home and she says straight out, you know, my boy alive? And she goes,
Wow.
don't BS me. Is my boy
Mm.
alive? And what kills me is I have to tell her, and I
That's gotta be so difficult, Robbie.
it is because at the other end she's screaming and her heart is ripped out and I
Mhm.
just gave her the worst news of the world. Yeah. And so yeah, I'll never forget that scream. I still hear her screaming at me on the
What
phone.
happened to him?
Oh boy. Christmas Eve, he was helping people move, right? From
Okay.
one house to the next. They're having a party. This boy had his life. He was going to university. He had his head on his shoulders. He was a great kid. This other individual got out of jail a day before, shows up
Right.
at the party, right?
Mhm.
And he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Seven people gave seven different statements that didn't match. Um, the case was just like so boggled up, and yeah.
What,
So
they that person killed him
yeah,
or threw him in the
killed
river?
him. Yep,
Yeah.
killed him.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but sometimes they kinda see that one person who's so different from them, the perpetrator, like you said, he had all his future in front of him, whereas
Yeah,
this person is like, and they kinda like they hate that person without really having knowing them, but they hate them for.
right. Yeah.
Let me ask you, have you worked on any cases having to do with the Highway of Tears? I believe it's the Canadian Transcontinental Highway that I've heard that there's been a lot of unsolved murders there, especially of Indigenous women dating back, I wanna say, to the '60s.
Yes.
Um,
Yes to everything.
that's
As far as I can go, and this is a relative emailed me,
Mhm.
and a corporal from the RCMP got me involved,
Okay,
unbeknownst to each other.
okay.
Certain information from the aunt came,
Mhm.
certain information he has inside came.
Right.
Um, then all of a sudden, other relatives started, and then they just disappeared. It was weird. Seriously, I'm three other relatives, so it's three in total, and him. But he still wants to go on to this. Um, Try to get a hold of those people.
Okay.
Dropped off the end of the world. Don't know what
You
happened
know
to
why
them.
I asked you this? Because I read through the series of all the cases. And it was like, is this a serial killer? Is there several serial killers? Because from what I understand, it's a big trucking lane,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And there's a theory that maybe it's a truck driver. That's why it's so difficult sometimes to solve it because this person is there and then they're gone. And
Right.
some of them have, unfortunately, some of the girls have been hitchhiking. Others have disappeared, but the crime scene has been close to the highway.
Right.
Do you think it's more than one person that's a perpetrator?
Um, yeah, I can answer that. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's it's unfortunate because we have the premise of what you just said.
Mhm.
People speculated it's a truck driver. People speculated it was the
Sure.
police. People speculated it was tribal members. People speculated that it's gang members.
Mhm.
There's so much speculation going on. But more than one person, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess because when you look at it, it's this is these crimes have been going on for decades.
Yeah.
Decades. And I know you could say, well, it's one person, but it's like how long is it going to be trucking around, and or is it a network also,
Right.
you know,
Human trafficking.
human trafficking, of course. Because let me tell you something. A lot of people think that this human trafficking and smuggling is a recent thing. That has been around for 100 years or more, as far as in here in modern times, where what they would do is kidnap women or young girls and sell them into sexual slavery. This is not something modern. This has been going around for a while.
Long time.
Um, and in some cases, then you have the occasional ones where they actually kill them, and I know in some cases, some of them the bodies have been found, and others they've never recovered them, but the circumstances are weird, so they know this person just didn't decide to like up and leave,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But
Um,
that
I
would
get a
be great.
call. I get a call from a lady who followed me since the 90s.
Okay,
Before there was like Facebook, MSN, and all that, right?
right.
I had a Robbie Thomas forums. That was where people
Okay,
would come from around the world. And so it was in the mid 2000s. She was, and I know who she was. She goes, I followed you, and and I know, Kim. Yeah, I understand. What's up? She goes, well, I hate to do this, and she goes, my daughter's been taken into the sex slave trade,
okay,
and the detective doesn't know what to do now because he's exhausted all his leads or whatever he had. And
okay,
she gave me permission to talk to you. So, okay, so I gave what I had to do, and I went ahead and did it. And her letter is on my page. It says, and he brought my daughter home in capital letters alive, and got her out of the sex slave trade.
okay.
Um, yeah, so I'm into that too.
Mhm.
Um, my
Yes.
partner on the show, she's huge in the human trafficking, being
Yes.
down Texas Alley.
Sure.
You know what I mean? The cartels and all that. She's had major experience. So I'm hoping this show kicks off and finally takes off so that we can go out there and help everybody.
Well, you know what? And I wanna plug my own book. I wrote a book about 3 years ago. It was about true crimes, but dating back to the 1920s. And there
Right.
was a murder. This happened in was it Pennsylvania, Marlene? Yeah, it was in Pennsylvania. Come to find out, as they do, what they thought was just the murder of a young girl, and they're thinking she was pregnant. And initially they thought, oh, she got involved with a married guy, and he got spooked. Maybe he was somebody important, killed her. They found her body. But as this investigation progresses, and we're talking here the 1920s, turns out because of a friend of hers, a friend of a friend kind of deal, because they're trying to figure out was it her boy, because she had a little boyfriend, but he's like, and this whole thing that apparently there was a tie-in to what they call white slavery. That's what they would call it in those years,
Right.
operating out of Vermont. Okay. They were bringing in girls from Pennsylvania, from Canada, from all over to this one house that they had. It, I guess it was a remote, it was like a big farmhouse in Vermont where they would distribute these girls to all these roadside brothels all over
Right.
the East Coast. All right. And my point being that even back then, we're talking 100 years. All
Right.
right. This was happening. All right. This was happening. And the same thing where they would get the girls hooked on drugs, use drugs on them. Back then, there was morphine, get them addicted. And then, of course, what would happen is once these girls were just so thoroughly, they would just kill them.
Right.
All right. And at some point, believe it or not, that crime never got solved. But, now there was always that thought of, was she, perhaps it wasn't a married lover or somebody. Maybe it was that for some reason she got pregnant and, maybe she was part of this ring or they were something like that and she was done away with because, to them life was, it didn't matter. But yeah, like you were explaining, this is not, this is not something recent. This has been around for many, many years.
Yeah. Yeah. A shame.
And
It's a shame. I mean,
yes,
um, I don't know how people can do that to people.
yeah,
As much as I try to even think of things like that, there's just no way. And every day I hear about certain things and
yeah.
different cases that they want me to get on and stuff, and it's
Hmm.
like I'm not pick and choosing. I just say right now it's just not the right time.
Okay.
Um, in Connecticut, a chief calls me up and says, um, "You got referred to me by another law enforcement," and he goes, "Here's the photos."
Hmm.
And 1974, high profile Army individual. She was murdered. And he goes, I'm at a standstill. Just give me something. So I looked at it all and I went through and I said, this, it's staged. It's a jilted lover for sure. And everything that I need to look at, I want to talk to the family. So I get the son on there and I go, you gotta be open with me. Your mom had affair? He goes, yes, she did. And I said, okay, she's missing a chain. She's missing a chain because I see it gone. And it's not in her possession, but it's in the guy's possession. He goes, wait, I got her jewelry box. And he gets out, he's on the phone. I hear him rumbling through it, and he goes, I can't find the chain. I said, well, that's the missing link. So the chief gets back on the phone, and he goes, you got to tell me, is there anything? I said, yeah, there's one building. I said, like, DNA doesn't go, blood don't go away. It's protein. It ain't going away, no matter how long it is. I said,
Okay.
even if you have to use luminol, and you go in there, and you'll be able to get it, right? He goes, oh my gosh, the building is still constructed there. It's still, I said, yeah. And he goes, we were told that that's where they would go and meet. I said, well, that's where they met probably for the last time. And
Okay.
so he goes, we don't have the money for resources to call out the forensics. He goes, I'm
Okay.
going to take what I got here and go into a meeting. Goes into his meeting. I think it was a week or so. Comes back, says, you know what? That opened the case up. Everything opened
Okay.
so they could call in. So, I mean, reopening cases like that, that was right on for them, right? I mean, now they're going in a direction. Um,
Exactly.
that I like because
Sure.
otherwise they would have been stuck and not being able to do it, right?
You know what? I have to laugh because, I do read up on true crime and other stuff. And lately there's been a bunch of women that have been murdered. And when you look at their life, they look like perfect. Not, I don't want to say perfect, but they're married, they have kids, they live in a nice house. That to look at them and they're having affairs and they've been done in by their lovers when they're like, "Hey, you know what? Either I want to break up or I'm not going to marry you or something along those lines."
Right.
You know, and all of a sudden, unfortunately, for their poor family, besides her getting killed, all this ugliness is exposed where this perfectly looking, soccer mom type is leading a double life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the bad boy really turns out to be bad.
Yeah. Do you remember the case NBC dubbed her Mother by Day, Hooker by Night?
No, I remember something like that. But yeah, what was obviously it's like what was she?
Yeah.
What was she streetwalking? Or was she's an escort or what?
Paige Bergfeld. That was her name. She's a very famous case. NBC did a big expose on it and what have you.
Uh
In
huh.
fact, the Zuckers wanted to fly me down to Colorado to show them
Okay.
where her body was, and I ain't doing that for your TV thing. I'm not doing that.
Right.
So this is where I got in with Sergeant Cliff Christ and discussing the case with him. And then again, that's another fool in the book. We're going through the motions of everything, and I named the guy, right? Lester
Okay.
Jones. Lester Jones. I said his name is Lester, like Lester. And he said they're looking at that guy, and he said, "What does he do?" And I said, "He works like on RVs or something." And he did. He was a mechanic. Then he let
Okay.
me in on it. He goes, "They found her car burnt across the way from there. We're
Okay.
trying to tie him to it." So, oh wow! So I gave him an area where I felt that she would have been. And then he
Okay.
goes, we're going to do this. I'm dressing up like a mechanic. I'm going to go apply for a job and talk to him and see if I can get in there. I said, oh, okay, great. They call me and they're in the car and got me on the phone. And I'm like on a speed chase with him in the car. And I felt like I was there. And he's telling me, he's following us because he made me out and he's
Oh
following us.
boy.
And I go, oh my gosh. And he goes, and you hear the people talking. There he is. He's turning left. He's turning right. He's following us. And so they turned, and then he kept going straight. And he goes, we lost him. He's gone. So I said, okay. And I said, he's probably going to where she would have been. So after a while, they drove up there. And sure enough, the tire tracks go, stop. And the footprints go, and they stop. And it looked like he was looking to the area where she was. Well, snow and everything went and what have
Oh,
you.
because
And
they hadn't recovered her.
right, right,
Okay. Okay. So he's like thinking, "Oh my God, the body."
right, right. So they go up there. They find a blouse that
Okay.
she would have worn.
Mm-hmm.
And then time went on, and I said it's between this horse ranch and this area, and they were a half a mile from
Okay.
finding her body. And a
Okay.
jogger went by and found her body, a hiker,
Okay.
which tied the case now to him. She was pregnant with a baby,
Oh.
right? So this made precedence in the United
Okay.
States. The judge deemed the fetus a
Okay.
human being and
Okay.
murder one. So not only murder one on Paige, but
So
murder one on the baby too.
twice, 2 for the price of 1. Yep.
Right. So Lester Jones in jail for that.
Because they discover that, you know what, he must have it was like he must have like, "Oh my god," "they're on to me," and again, that thinking, if there's no body, there's no crime.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. And they
which I know
went to look for the murder weapon because I kept telling them, I said, stabbing her like this, but it's not a knife. It's like a screwdriver, right? So they were trying to
Uh-huh.
look inside his tools and stuff. They made him
So let
out.
me ask you something, did they have a relationship or he just happened
No, they had a relationship.
okay.
Yeah, he was seeing her, and then Lester's wife went to the stand, and Lester's wife said, he said he was going to go turn the lights off in the shop, and that's when he was burning the car and
Oh,
and
boy.
her
Yeah.
body and all this
Let
stuff,
me tell
right?
you something, Robbie. We could do a whole nother show on spouses of killers that saying, "I had no idea," and it's like, "Oh, come on."
Oh, I know,
Don't tell
I
me.
know.
There's gotta be times you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh my god," like, "Okay." You gotta feel unsafe. But that's a whole no it I think that sometimes, because you can be really good, like, you've heard of, like, the BTK killer, and then
yeah, yeah.
see, they're horrible, and then they've got this they belong to the church and their wife and the kids, and they've got this area where he forbids his wife to go into that room or open a box or something,
Right.
and I'm thinking, "Come on, my husband tells me don't open that box. Guess what's the first thing I wanna be doing? I'm gonna be opening the box."
Open that box. Yeah,
It's like, "What do you
yeah.
mean I can't open that box?"
I know,
And
I know.
I'm talking about a normal marriage relationship,
Yep.
you know? As a woman, you're gonna be like, "Huh?
Yeah.
Why?" Unless it's Christmas and I'm thinking you might have my gift in there,
Right.
100% I'm gonna be digging in there, and I don't care if you get mad about it. So, some of those things that you hear sometimes, it's like, you know what, that's same thing like what happened with the Fox Hollow Farm, with Herb Baumeister, he's got bodies scattered all over the acreage around the
Oh,
house,
yeah.
and his wife is like, "I had no idea." It's like, "Mhm."
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But it has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you, Robbie.
And
Tell
you
me,
too.
when is your show going to air, or do you have
Oh my goodness. I'm in one right now, and it's won awards. Really quick, I didn't forget to tell you about this one. It's called
yeah.
Halloween Obsessed. Now, Linda Palmer, the director from LA, award-winning director, called me up and said, "Do you want to be in it?" It's gonna Michael Gross from Family Ties, LA Law, Tremors. He's in it.
Yes, I was gonna say that. I'm sorry, I know him more from Tremors. I
Yeah,
remember Family
right.
Ties, but yeah.
And Dee Wallace from E.T., the
Yes.
mom, and
Mhm.
Halloween and all critters and all that. She's in it. Ray Davies is in it. I'm in it. I produced 3 episodes and also in
Okay.
front of the camera, my own 3 episodes. They just showed the second episode. You can get it on Amazon Prime in America, or you can get it on Tubi TV and you can watch it.
And
The
what's the
first
name of it?
Halloween Obsessed.
Halloween Obsessed.
Yeah.
And is the entire season out or just up to a certain point?
It just started coming out. Second
Okay.
episode, I believe, is out.
Okay.
You get Misconception of Witches is the first one. Haunted Attractions is the second one, and then whatever the third one they're going to name of mine, they're going to put up there.
Okay. Okay. Wow. And well, you've got 10 books. Are you working on? I mean, why not, right? You got another book in the works or no?
I'm trying to breathe with all this going on.
Right,
Um,
and that's why I'm saying it because I'm thinking, the when you look at the TV part, but for totality of detail, because I imagine they've got to be able to scrunch a story into X amount of time,
yeah,
so there's
yeah,
certain details that sometimes get omitted, whereas when you write the book, you could put in there like the whole thing.
the
But yes,
whole
I know.
thing. Yeah, I know. We finished the series in 2017 and never did get time to air. We did the full series all through the most haunted places in America. That
Mhm.
was called Coexistence. I don't know if that's coming out or not on DVD. I know it's on DVD soon. Um,
Okay.
and then I just picked up, well, actually, they picked me up. I'm going to help produce and be in front of the camera on a major film that's coming out, Lily's Cry.
Lily's Cry. Are we talking here fiction or nonfiction?
It is nonfiction, but it will have fictional moments in it.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay. But it's based on some type of nonfiction story, and then they
absolutely. Absolutely.
Is it murder, mystery, paranormal?
Yeah, a little bit of both, a little bit of everything.
Okay. That's
Yep.
interesting. So
Yeah.
are you will you have it up on your website when that's going to be released?
No, I actually just got called on that about a few days ago,
Oh, okay,
and
I'm getting ahead of
yeah,
myself.
no, but
Okay.
on my website, you can see Halloween Obsessed, it's on there, and
Oh,
yeah, yeah,
I'm gonna go on Amazon as soon as I'm gonna because you know what? Sometimes I hate to say there's a bunch of shows out there, but the quality and I'm pretty open-minded, let me tell you. I'm
yeah,
pretty open-minded. But some of them it's like either it's the same old storyline that you've seen in 20 million shows, like they kind of rehash the same
yeah,
stories and it's like, come on, somebody please come up with something original, you know?
absolutely. You
Um
won't be disappointed. I
so I'm
mean, it's
always
won so many
looking
awards. Yeah,
for all those it's like, or, or I like it when they, when it's a story and they do the historical, research on it, so that's accurate,
right.
you know,
Yeah,
give me the scoop on it.
right.
It's been absolutely great to talk to you,
You too.
Bobby.
Thank you.
So I will keep tabs on you, and then I know I'm thank you so much for coming on the show. It sounds like you're really, really busy, but that's a good busy.
Yeah, it's a
Like you
good
said,
busy.
after 2 years of sitting on the sofa, everybody's like, getting back
I
into
know.
this. Yeah, me and my husband, before we would go to these Comic Cons and horror cons and all this. And one time we even participated in some, and then, everything just went. And now they're starting to come back.
Yep.
And we would have a great time going out there, seeing people dressed up. And, they had a lot of celebrities also at the shows. And I'm glad to have that come back.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, of
I
course.
mean, I named my couches during COVID. They got names now.
Oh, that's great. That is great. I
Uh,
love that. You know what? It's unfortunate but true. Everybody put on weight.
yeah,
I was talking to my chickens. I have chickens.
yeah, of
It's like
course.
yeah, it's like, you start like all of a sudden, I'm like sitting there watching them a lot and I was like, what's wrong with this picture?
I know, right? I know.
Yeah, but anyway, on to better times. Take
Yeah,
care and happy
you
Halloween,
too.
happy holidays,
You
okay?
too. Thank you so
Take
much.
care. No, of
Okay.
course, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not kidding. When I finish here, I'm gonna go look at Halloween Obsessed. I always like to look at new shows. And let me tell you something. I'm pretty understanding about quality of shows. If I see a how can I tell you? When you see a storyline or an idea, even if the presentation is a little bit wonky or maybe even unprofessional, I appreciate a good idea or a good storyline. I really do. The problem for me is when you have the same old, it's like, wait a minute, I've seen this same story of XYZ, this ghost, this haunting, this murder, this whatever. It's like everybody and their second cousin has done a version of this story. Come on, nobody can dig up anything new, you know? Or and I'm obviously with when you have true crime, uh sometimes they, like I said, it's just, verbatim. It's almost like the same thing another show put. But, I like it when, whether it's a show about a haunted house or ghosts or paranormal activity or even true crime, let's go off into the weeds. Why don't we look at the history of the location or look at motivating factors, or I even like it when they even go into the background of the killer if that person's ever known, like, what was the background of this person? But sometimes they kind of leave like this big hole there. He was born in so and so and this and so and so. I was like, okay, but can't you tell me, like, what happened to this person as they were growing up, or maybe even things that happened around them? No. Was there any other? I'm going to give you a perfect example. Recently, yesterday, that's how recently I was doing research on an article I'm writing, and I come across a murderer. His name was Paul John Knowles, and he was a Floridian, and he a real unusual guy. This was 1974. 1974. Bottom line, he basically he went through like in a couple of months he went through like 4 or 5 states on a murder spree. And believe it or not, this guy apparently he had a rough childhood. A dysfunctional family, ended up in foster homes, even got placed here in a very infamous boys reform school in northern Florida called Dozier Reform School. That's a whole nother story. I did a show on that. Bottom line, by the time he's 19, he's already in jail, burglary, and then something broke in this guy along the way, and he ends up being a serial killer. And come to find out, he confessed supposedly to 35 murders, even though because he got when he was being extradited because he was arrested in Georgia, and was the thing. Remember, he had committed murders in several states, so it was like staying in line. All these prosecutors from the different states to try this guy. I mean, he wasn't going to go anywhere. You know, he, and he also he confessed. There's a very famous child abduction case, one of many that occurred right around the time because this is the thing. This guy, he is like I said, he goes to prison here in Florida in Brayford, which is the state pen for burglary. He's 19. Must have been rough. Okay. He starts this correspondence pen pal kind of deal with this woman, divorcee, who lives in San Francisco. All right. She comes down, obviously, and they meet. She comes from San Francisco and they become engaged. Pray tell why? Who knows? But she pays for his attorney fees. He Instead of doing the 3 years he was sentenced to, she gets him out like in 2 years. What does Paul do? Paul jets off to San Francisco to claim his bride. Something happened. Nobody knows exactly what that when between the time that she came to see him here in Florida when he was still behind bars to when he showed up in San Francisco, which obviously she had expected him. She was the one that got him out. Something happened where she broke off the engagement right then and there. Something spooked her that she broke off the engagement. He said later on that night he killed 3 people on the streets of San Francisco. Again, they're not sure how much of what he claimed was accurate. That he killed people, yes, he did. But that he killed all the ones that he said he did, there's some that it's doubtful. So apparently this, whatever you want to call it, rage, whatever, sets him off and he goes on this multi-state killing spree for like 3 or 4 months. Rapes, he kills. I mean, this man was savage, and he was in his 20s, early 20s. And what happens is finally his last thing is he is driving a stolen vehicle from one of his victims, and a Florida state trooper recognizes that, I guess they had a bolo that this is a stolen vehicle and this person is a murderer. We're looking for him. The trooper pulls him over. They still don't know how he over, I want to say, overpowered the trooper, which is difficult to believe. Overpowers the trooper, plus abducts another man, sticks him in the thing, drives off. This was already in northern Florida. Crosses over into Georgia. All right. Crashes his vehicle because he's being chased by the police. Because of course there's a big extensive manhunt already looking for him. Runs off into a field, comes to a farmhouse, an abandoned farmhouse, finds an old shotgun in the farmhouse, and then I guess he goes wandering around. This is farmland, farming area. Finds this man, tries to abduct him, but this shotgun that he found apparently it was broken or it wasn't good. Jams, and the farmer's like makes him stay there with his own gun until the police arrive. Okay, when the police arrive, they go to the vehicle that's crashed. They find evidence of the 2 men that had been abducted, but they're not there. They're not in the car. They're like, where did he go? So they're pressing him to tell him because they're still thinking, they're hoping that these 2 men are alive. Remember, one of them is a state trooper. And by the way, once upon a time, state troopers, not now, but once upon a time, state troopers, especially back in those years, they had a height requirement. I want to say it was like 6 or 6'1". And my point being that back in those years when this happened, 1974, troopers were really tall guys, because they had like a, I want to say it was even more than 6 or 6'1" or 6'2". They were all, if you wanted to be a trooper, you had to be a tall person. So anyway, law enforcement is here holding out, like thinking, okay, he just kidnapped or took these 2 men. Maybe they're still alive. This guy's refusing to say where it is. A couple of days go by, and a hunter comes upon the bodies of both of these men that they had been handcuffed to a tree and shot in the head. These were his last victims. Okay. He's obviously, he gets extradited, and one of the times they're transferring him, he's still in Georgia. They're being transferred. He picks his handcuff keys with, with something, I don't know how, with a pin, I don't know how. And he tries to wreck the car that he's in, and an agent from the Georgia Bureau of, State Bureau shoots him dead. So basically, he doesn't go to trial for any of the murders. All right. Now, during part of his time that he's running around killing people, he has an attorney that's lives in Miami. All right. He starts mailing this attorney tapes. Remember, this is the time of cassette tapes where he's basically, well, see, this is the thing. Nobody ever really knows. I'm going to explain why. He's mailing supposedly confessional tapes to this attorney. Supposedly, one of the times that he's coming back from the Keys with a couple of hitchhikers, that he picks up a couple of hitchhikers coming in from the Keys. A couple, as in a man and a woman. They're really not sure if they were abducted or they were just hitchhiking. God knows. He gets pulled over. He's in a stolen vehicle. He gets pulled over by a police officer, I guess, but for traffic infraction, only gets a warning. But he gets so frazzled by the traffic stop that the couple he's traveling with, he just lets them go in Miami. He's like leave. Lucky for them, because I'm sure he had intentions of killing them. He stops to see this attorney that he has in Florida, Miami. Supposedly, this attorney's telling, or he calls him. I want to say he calls him, tells him, hey, I can represent you, but you turn yourself in. But anyway, he's been mailing. Later on, this attorney goes on to say that he had never opened any of the envelopes or listened to any of the tapes. In other words, he was saying all this time that this guy's killing all these people, I had no knowledge whatsoever of what he was doing. All I know is he was sending me these tapes. I don't know. So he refuses to turn them over to law enforcement. And finally, I guess they subpoenaed him. They made him, he got jailed. For some strange reason, his wife also went to jail around that time. Same thing. In other words, for not obeying the authority. He was citing attorney-client privilege. Even though I'm thinking, well, his client was dead at that point. Anyway, the tapes eventually go to the law enforcement in Georgia. I guess they were the ones that had first dibs on this guy. The grand jury listened to these tapes, never released them to the public. Now, what he said on the tapes, God only knows. And later on, a few years later on, Georgia says, oh, oops, these tapes were destroyed in a flood that there was at the, I can't remember, it was some type of city hall where they kept, remember, this is pre-computer, where they kept all this evidence tapes. And oops, guess what? The tapes got destroyed. Incredible. My point being that supposedly around the time that he was doing these things in northern Florida, there was 2 girls in a family named Mylette and, was it Annette? Oh my God, Marlene Johnson. I'm sorry, I'm making stuff up. Both of these girls are taken from their home. They had 3 sisters. They lived I want to say in Jacksonville. Anderson. I'm sorry, not Johnson. Anderson. Their last name is Anderson. Making stuff up. And s- somebody, it's never been solved, comes into the house and takes both girls, ages 7 and 11. There was another sister there, wasn't taken. Okay. Taken from inside their home. The girls have never been found. Their bodies have never been found. He said that he was the one that killed them. They think that he was just confessing to a murder that he didn't commit, because apparently what the idea was that of him sending these tapes was that he wanted the notoriety. In other words, he was like on a kamikaze. I'm gonna die, but I want to be famous kind of deal. All right. So I'm gonna commit as many atrocious murders as I can so that can't be ignored. And somebody is going to write books about me and blah blah blah. And the truth is, I myself, I had never heard of this guy before I read up on him. It's one of those things. He did all these atrocious, horrible crimes, and he went on a killing spree just to make sure that he was going to be famous. And it turns out, like, really, as a matter of fact, he was operating around the same times, the same years as Ted Bundy. And of course, everybody knows who Ted Bundy is. So again, which is why I was asking Robbie about that. Sometimes you will have these crime scenes where either one, the victim's never been found, or what's found when it's found, it's like there's nothing, there's no soft tissue. Maybe even the bones have been scattered by animals. Sometimes there's no clothing. In other words, anything that could be used to identify is gone. If the method of killing the person didn't involve like shooting or stabbing, in other words, that there's some evidence on the bone. Let's say it was a really, really long time ago, like the murder of these two girls, which was in 1974. There's no soft tissue to say how were they killed, or how, um, sometimes you think, okay, but the only way that some of these cases, and DNA, forget it. DNA is like, whoop, you know. Sometimes, yeah, they could find something, especially if back then there was a suspect and they did take some type of evidence, maybe from a car, from a house or something, and hopefully it wasn't chucked out, because I've heard of that happening. And there maybe years and years and years later, they were able to, find some physical evidence or some DNA. But again, the longer, or if it was if it's a body that's been out in the wilderness or buried, or God knows, it's like it's the Robbies of the world who are going to solve these crimes, or at least point in the direction. Um, or in this case, let's say this guy Knowles who confessed to it. What if he really did do it? It makes you wonder, could Robbie say, yeah, no, that guy, he really did do this crime. He really was the one that um, was the perpetrator, despite maybe the belief at that time that he was just confessing to it for the notoriety, because of course this was around that time. As a matter of fact, there were five young girls that just in a 3-month period, like June, July, August, or July, August, September of 1974, five young girls of that same age group disappeared in that area of northern Florida. Two of them, eventually their bodies were found. The crime has never been solved. All right. Which, by the way, you, you got to be pretty bold to actually go into somebody's home, which, from what I understand, the parent or the parents had stepped out for a moment, like they had left to do a little errand. And in that moment, they were gone like very little time. This person came into the house and took both of them. And and I guess whether and this is another thing also, as time goes by, all the people that could care, parents pass away. Possibly there's the siblings are still alive, but even for the family just to know, this is what happened to them, or this is the person responsible. Or in some cases, actually leading to say, you know what, that Jane Doe or that John Doe that we've had, that we couldn't put a name to, this is, and that family is able to give a burial, or, maybe according to their faith or whatever the case might be, and put a headstone and say, okay, maybe we've known all along that this person was not alive, but we know where they're at now, and we could recognize them. And this is what I'm thinking that a Robbie does for a family sometimes, which is of the most horrible scenarios that a person could have, whether it's a parent or whatever the relationship is, or a friend, that the very least that you have that small measure of satisfaction of either, like I said, identifying who committed the murder, or finding that loved one and being able to inter them instead of thinking they're out there somewhere, God knows where, you know. Uh, because I guess it gets to the point in some cases where, and I imagine as time goes by, especially when you see these cold cases, that is, when we're talking about, we know something happened to our loved one, but we've never even found them wherever they are. That even it gets to the point where if I never have or know who did it, and if they're got punished for it, at the very least, I know that my loved one, I know I have them back with me. That's, think about it. But yeah, this is a very interesting area. I love true crime, but I'm also fascinated by like like I say, tell everybody, if all these murderers that are not being busted because of DNA, because somebody in the family has put in a DNA sample for ancestry purposes. So I'm saying, if you've got some weird uncle, grandpa, or family friend that gets all agitated when you're saying, "Hey, I'm gonna go get my pie chart done," and they're like, "No, no, no, no." Worry about them. It's like, why doesn't this person want you to get your pie chart done? They don't want that DNA in that database. God knows, all of a sudden, because that's exactly how they have tracked some of these killers down. They've tracked them down because they have the DNA evidence, and now they finally have a match. They're able, because there's a way of, in other words, that they can follow it back from that partial DNA of somebody that's related to the killer. In other words, they start, what you might call it, they start eliminating people until it basically they narrow it down. And maybe the fewer people that you got to pick from, the easier it is to kind of determine, especially if that person might have some type of, criminal history, things of that nature. Who knows? Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Again, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. I hope you like this show with Robbie Thomas. Again, do not forget to check him out. His website is robbiethomas.net, and the show he was talking about that's been released on Amazon is Halloween Obsessed. This is the right time of the year for it. And of course, he's got 10 books. So, if true crime is your bag, baby, like it is mine, definitely of interest. Don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter. Like I said, I bring on their news articles. I bring back links to old shows, really interesting guests. It's just as interesting as it was. As you know, not all these shows really are related to whether it's current events. So anything that was done 3 years ago is just as interesting. And come back. I have lots and lots of great guests lined up. I'm booked into 2023, which, by the way, January, we're going into season 13 of Stories of the Supernatural. All right. Don't forget, you can catch us on all the major podcast platforms like Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Spotify. You can find Stories of the Supernatural. You can find Nightshade Diary, which is where I narrate like classic ghost and adventure stories like From Weird Tales, Edgar Rice Burroughs, some of those pulp fiction novels, all that stuff I do in a Nightshade Diary, or Supernatural Storytime, which is when I read like some true life kind of stories about hauntings, cryptids, weird experiences, UFOs, you name it. So yeah, I have all these different podcast series on all the major podcast platforms. But you can always come to Miami Ghost Chronicles to find links where I have the actual MP3 files that you can download, that you can listen to without commercial interruption, and video links, which of course, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Rumble, I'm everywhere. I'm on Roku. If you go to Roku and you look up Rumble, besides YouTube, you can also on Roku. If you go to the Rumble, download the Rumble channel, you can find me there also just as well. I'm all over the place, guys. So come back, like I said, and thank you so much. for spending this time with me. Take care.